Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jesse Aman. I'm a senior associate on the legislative and political affairs team at Capalino. I will be moderating today's Future of New York discussion, where we'll be talking about the upcoming New York City elections and key issues driving New York's recovery in partnership with the Honan Strategy Group. I'm thrilled to be joined by our own Capalino's esteemed CEO, James Capalino, and Bradley Honan, CEO of Honan Strategy Group. As you may know, Capalino is a leading urban strategy firm in New York and has been at the forefront of New York government relations for more than 4 decades. We recently expanded our services to help clients navigate the political and business climate with expertise in strategy, real estate, lobbying, financing, social impact, and sustainability. New leadership will take office in New York City in 2021, and the impact of this election will be felt across all business sectors and communities as leaders develop a roadmap for New York City's economic recovery. With over 70% of local offices up for grabs, including the mayor, comptroller, all 5 borough presidents, and over 35 council seats, there are officially 518 participating candidates running for public office in 2021. And for the first time in history, candidates will be elected through ranked choice voting. In order to help businesses and organizations navigate this transition, Capalino conducted a new forward-thinking poll with the Honan Strategy Group, and we're excited to share those poll results and key takeaways during this hour. Before we get started, I want to remind our audience that this panel will last 1 hour. We'll speak for about 45 to 50 minutes and then take questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and we will get to it at the end. So Bradley, welcome, and I'll let you take the show away.
Jesse, thank you so much for the introduction. Jim, pleased to be with you and the rest of the audience. We have some very interesting survey results in a couple of different areas that we wanted to go through. And Jesse, I was going to give everybody an introduction to the survey that we've conducted in terms of how we've done it methodologically, and then walk through what I think are some slides and data points that give us a good example of the environment and the mood today. One of the things that I want to start by doing is giving everybody an orientation of how we conducted the survey methodologically. This was something that Jim impressed upon me as we were getting this underway, that we do this as robustly, as methodologically accurately as we could, and we have done that. Let me tell you a little bit about the survey. We went out and conducted 750 survey interviews between May 26th and June 1st. We just conducted the survey with likely Democratic primary voters, and we didn't just ask people if they were participating in the primary. We actually worked in collaboration with Prime New York, an organization many of you are probably familiar with. We got data from them about voters that had actually participated in at least 2 of the recent Democratic primary elections. And we can talk about other polls when we get to the Q&A, but that is a distinct difference between this survey and others that purport to represent the viewpoints of likely voters. We have a margin of error on the survey of about 3.17%. So we have a high degree of statistical precision and accuracy. As we were getting ready to put together our data analysis, AOC came out and endorsed Maya Wiley. And we all thought that it made sense to go and conduct some more survey interviews to see what impact that endorsement was going to have on the race. And we have some data there. So we went out and complemented our sample with another 200 interviews. I'm not going to go too much deeper in the methodology right now, but this is pretty robust. We talked to voters on their landlines. We talked to them on their cell phones. These were live human beings calling people rather than some of the other technology that others are using for their surveys. As I say, we only sampled Democratic voters. And when we get to the ballot question, we didn't just ask people how they intended to vote. we actually ran a ranked choice voting simulation. That was something that Jim wanted to do. That's different about this poll, and we'll go through those results. Let me start, Jesse, by just giving everybody an orientation about what we've concluded. The city has been through a whole heck of a lot over the last 12, 18 months. And what we see today is an unbridled sense of hope and optimism and enthusiasm about the future. That's not to say that there wasn't a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, death, and suffering, but people are feeling very, very good about the city today. 92% somewhat or strongly agreed that while the city was very hard hit by the pandemic, they always knew the city would recover. 81% somewhat or strongly agree, and 67% strongly agree that they would rather live in New York City than just about any other place. So the idea and the headlines that some of us have been reading about people fleeing the city, giving up on the city, rolling up the sidewalks, whatever analogy that you want to use, just doesn't play out in the data at all. And indeed, when we ask people about whether they believe the best days for New York City are ahead of us or behind us, a very, very small number, only about 1 in 10, say the city's best days are behind us. People are very, very optimistic about the city's future and are coming together in ways that maybe some of us wouldn't have expected to be so substantial. Now, I don't want to be all positive. There are certainly work that needs to be done in the eyes of the public. And when we ask them about some of the leading issues that they want the next city government, the next administration to address, there are a number of important issues. Housing and affordable housing tops the list. Economy, jobs, economic development, economic opportunities at 15%. Education, improving our schools at 12%. Crime, police reform are certainly issues. They're certainly going to matter in this election. Voters want them to be part of what the city government does next. But there are other issues as well that explain where people's heads are right now. So, Jesse, that's a little bit of an introduction in terms of the environment and the issues that we see that are influencing the political atmosphere and the climate today.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And we really want to make this an interactive webinar. So we will be doing some live polling questions. So starting with the first question, if we can pull that up on the live poll. If you folks want to go ahead and answer that. Is today's optimism on the part of the public towards the recovery misplaced or not? So I will give some seconds for folks to go ahead and answer that. And while we wait, we have, of course, the expert in it all, Jim, and, in light of this question, really want to get your insight as to, someone who has played a significant role in post 9/11 recovery in the city. How do you foresee New York City recovering in the next 5 years?
Well, I appreciate the question. I think there are three key dimensions to the answer to that question. The first will be the extent to which the next mayor really prioritizes in a way that I think Mayor Bloomberg did brilliantly in the post 9/11 environment. Articulating a set of goals and backing those goals up with resource commitments that make it possible for New Yorkers to actually experience some significant improvement as a function of what they've experienced over the course of the pandemic. And then we move on, I think, to the larger question of federal, state, and local relations. Let me say without fear of contradiction, every single night that I go to bed and put my head on the pillow, I say a prayer and thank the Lord that we have a guy by the name of Chuck Schumer in our lives. Because what Senator Schumer was able to do, ladies and gentlemen, for the financial welfare of our state and the city is nothing short of astounding. And I'm not saying that he overplayed his hand or in any way, tried to sort of take advantage of the process, but he delivered big time for the state and the city budget and has put us in a position where the next mayor, and maybe Bradley can help me out with the figure, but I think, Brad, we're talking about a city budget that has $20 billion more money to spend than Mayor de Blasio had in the last budget. And that has not a dime of that's coming from an increase in taxes. So our next mayor is going to be in a position to be able to fund a lot of really critical objectives. And clearly, there are parts of the city's economy that are going to need a lot of help in getting recovered. Now we've seen tremendous progress in the dining part of the hospitality sector, but we haven't seen this, and we talk to our hotel clients all the time, we haven't seen hotel occupancy rates rise substantially. And a lot of those hotels are probably going to be in foreclosure for a variety of reasons. So the next mayor is probably going to have to come up with a strategy just to help the hotel sector recovery, which is critical to getting tourists back to New York.
Thank you so much, Jim. And sorry, we were having some technical difficulties, but I did want to share that 80% of the audience did agree that the the optimism in New York City is very much granted. So just wanted to share that. And thank you both. So we'll move on to the next topic, which will be on the mayoral election. I'll let Bradley talk about the results.
Thank you, Jesse. So here are some data points that we wanted to review and bring people's attention to as it relates to the ballot. What we've done here is a couple of ways of asking the ballot. The first thing we did is we asked people, 950 people that we polled, which candidate they are voting for. And we see that Adams is ahead 28 to Yang's 19, Garcia 13, Donovan 9, Wiley 7, Stringer lower than that. And what we did is we asked people who were undecided, the 16% that were undecided, to which candidate they might lean to. We gave them a bit of a nudge, Jesse, and asked them to try and tell us which way they were going to lean if they had to lean. And we then reallocated those votes into the relevant categories of the candidates. And we see that Eric Adams' lead increases. He gets almost about a third of the vote in a multi-candidate field at that point. Yang goes up a couple of points to 21. Garcia goes up a couple of points. And so this question about how people are going to lean and how they're going to vote in their second and third choices is obviously, in a scenario of ranked choice voting, incredibly important. I see that there's a question right now that's been put in about ranked choice voting. And I think one of the things that's important to realize about this election is how many people are going to opt out of participating in ranked choice voting. Here is a chart. I'm going to draw everybody's attention to the lower right quadrant here, the numbers that we've highlighted in yellow. When we asked people if they had a third choice in the mayoral election, 65% said they didn't. When we get to a fourth choice, 90% say they don't. And when we get to a fifth choice, almost nobody has a decision to make. And as everybody knows, we have mayor, we have comptroller, we have in some cases borough presidents, and we have city council races. So there's going to be a lot of people that don't take advantage of ranked choice voting. And so it gives enormous power, perhaps disproportionate power, to voters that are going to actually go through and choose 5 candidates. I did my absentee ballot the other day. It's pretty arduous. I ended up voting about 20 times on my ballot when you factor in all the races. I live in Manhattan, so I got 1 vote on DA. So I voted about 40 times when all the judicial elections are including. It's a fatiguing process, and we can see in the data here, most people won't. Nevertheless, one of the things Jim wanted to do was run an actual ranked choice voting simulation where we reallocated votes for candidates that were still in the race. You can see Morales, McGuire quickly drop out in this scenario. Wiley runs out of gas fairly quickly in our survey. By the time we get to round 6, we see Adams in the lead, 56-44. This mirrors pretty close. If some of you saw the Marist poll the other day, I think they have Adams winding up at about 52 or 54%. So in a ranked choice voting environment, it looks like Adams ahead at this point, although some of these candidates are going to carry a whole heck of a lot of weight. Stringer in particular, we're seeing a lot of his voters are likely to choose 5 choices, and they're going to be relevant throughout this process, particularly if Scott gets knocked out fairly early on, which I think he will. So that's my summary, Jesse, of what we've seen in the horse race data here. Obviously, there was a debate last night. There's a lot of political activity, and this race has been very, very dynamic. There's a lot that's changing, but this is our best sense of where the race stands today and how different groups are breaking.
Thank you, Bradley. And like you said, it's so many names and so much going into actually filling out the new ballot, the new ranked choice voting ballot. So we wanted to get folks' insight on this. On our next live question is, regardless of who you will vote for, who do you think will actually win the election? And so we will give a few seconds to get folks to answer that question. And there are all candidates on there. Okay, we're seeing Eric Adams leading with 67%, 22 folks voted for Adams. And then we have Catherine Garcia in at 21%. And then we have Stringer at 3%, Yang at 6%, and 3% folks don't know, which is very reflective of the results that you shared with us, Bradley. Jim, I want to turn it over to you. So in light of this entire ranked choice voting conversation, what are your thoughts on voters ranking all 5 candidates, and how do you think that will impact the results?
I want to try to be fair to the proponents of ranked choice voting. But I will tell you that I think when the dust settles, we are going to profoundly regret that to save $21 million on the cost of a runoff. That's right. $30 billion budget. We decided that saving $21 million was important enough that we imposed this new regime and then devoted essentially $0, and Bradley will correct me if I'm wrong, to educating the public about how it works. So I mean, if you want a prescription for a bad outcome, guys, somebody just signed the script for it. I'm not happy with the way the whole thing's been handled. I think the mayor kind of just took his eyes completely off the steering wheel during the course of this whole thing. He clearly could have exercised better leadership on the issue of promoting and educating the electorate about ranked choice voting. And I fully expect we will see some. I don't think the outcome is going to change as it relates to Adams, but I think we're going to see some unusual indicators come out of ranked choice voting just as a result of the confusion that exists on the part of the electorate.
Thank you. And this next question goes to both of you. So what do you think the poll results show us about who New Yorkers are supporting and why? Bradley, what have you found that has been particularly surprising? And we've had a lot happen over the last month, I would say, and I know someone in the Q&A box asked how this can be relatable if the data is from a month ago. I Bradley, I will let you kind of clarify that because I know you're the expert there. But I think we really want to highlight, what some key moments have been over the last month or so that have influenced New Yorkers to sway the way that they're swaying and given the poll results.
Jesse, it's a very, very good question. Let me go, if I can, a little broader and give you two events that happened before a month ago that I think are very relevant to what we're seeing here. Number one is a little known guy by the name of Andrew Yang, who ran for president, got a lot of attention, didn't get so many votes, but raised his profile enormously. And while I don't think he's going to prevail, he's certainly sucked a whole lot of oxygen out of this race and has arguably taken a lot of opportunity for Garcia and Wiley to get out in front and play a bigger role in this election. I think the other thing that also happened more than a month ago was Donald Trump not getting reelected. What we have seen since Trump was elected is an enormous surge in the number of voters that are turning out, number of people donating to campaigns, active in elections, and a real energy on the part of progressive voters. And I would argue that Trump being defeated, and he was defeated, has really defanged the progressive movement. I think crime is certainly an important issue. I don't think it's the leading issue. It's certainly a very important issue, which has given him and his law enforcement background, and as well as a police reformer, a lot of credibility in this environment. I think the New York Times endorsement of Catherine Garcia has been very, very relevant. And I think Stringer, who was leading this race before Yang even entered it, obviously the multiple rounds of allegations of sexual assault have altered the outcome. So I think those are the five things that we're seeing right now. And I think in terms of what we've seen in the last month, we have seen energy moving towards Wiley and momentum moving toward Garcia. Is it enough? Is there enough time left? I'm not sure. There's still a lot of progressive voters backing Adams right now. Can Wiley crack that? Can Garcia crack it? It remains to be seen. But this is a dynamic race. This is changing almost day by day. There was a debate last night, which I think will change minds as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all very, very helpful. And I want to throw it back to Jim. And Jim, given your experience on the Koch campaign and in the administration, what are your thoughts on how campaigning has changed since then, or what are some things that have remained the same?
Well, it's interesting you raised this because I had this conversation with a former Koch colleague the other day. We remembered that when Ed ran for mayor, there were 3 key calendar milestones around which the campaign were organized. And I want to watch for the smile on Bradley's face. And if anybody, if I was in a position, if we were in a position to hold a little poll here, dinner's on me for the person who can answer the question correctly. So there were 3 key timing milestones that we organized the campaign around. The morning, midday, and afternoon filing deadlines of the reporters who covered the race. That's what it came down to, guys. So every single morning by 10 o'clock, Ed had done something to draw attention to himself. The same thing by 2:15, the same thing by 5 o'clock or 5:30 for the next morning newspaper. Guys, today it's called 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day. The news cycle never stops. Digital media has radically transformed the whole conduct of campaigning. I mean, I'm amazed, guys, at how many emails I get during the course of the day from one campaign smacking the other guy in the nose for something they said at breakfast this morning or at lunch, or maybe just an hour ago. I mean, I don't think I'd have the, I don't know that I'd have the energy bandwidth, never mind never mind the intellectual bandwidth to manage a campaign today. It's just amazing. Right, Brad? What's happened?
It never stops. It never stops, and there's not too many opportunities to catch any shut eye, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I'd say a lot has changed too, right? From, folks with diverse backgrounds running profits who not necessarily coming from government themselves. So I think a lot has changed, right? And a lot will continue to change. So thank you both for that. We want to move on to the next segment, which will be on restaurants and open streets. And Bradley will also be sharing some full results on that.
Yeah, Jesse, let me just bookend what a couple of things I wanted to mention, which I probably should have included in the prior segment. One of the things, and I know there are a couple of questions about this, we did go and do some additional interviews with these voters after the AOC endorsement of Wiley. We posed a couple of questions that I think are worth keeping in mind. First of all, we wanted just to do a information check-in to Jim's point right now. There is a whole lot of information that is being presented to voters every day, and some of it goes in one ear and out the other because they are overwhelmed with all of the information and content that's being shown to them. So the first question we wanted to just baseline was, to what extent are voters aware that AOC had come out and endorsed Maya Wiley? What we found is a fair number had, 60%, which is substantial. This is in the couple of days following the announcement. There's definitely some confusion. As you can see, 6% think it was Garcia, 5% behind Morales, 26% just were not aware of that political information. And that, I think, suggests how difficult it is to be heard and to get your voice heard, to Jim's point, in this environment today. The next question we wanted to understand is, what impact would this endorsement likely have on the race? That's why we went and did these additional interviews. And what we found is that although AOC is very, very popular in the city, her endorsement has some impact, but it's relatively muted. About 4 in 10, 38% say AOC getting behind a candidate would make them more likely to vote for that candidate. About half of that, 2 in 10, would be less likely to vote for that candidate. Another third say it really wouldn't make any difference in how they were going to vote for mayor. And about 1 in 10 said that they really didn't know. We then went one step further and ran what we call an informed ballot, where we presented the ballot to them under the context of AOC, Elizabeth Warren, Jumaane Williams had come out and endorsed Maya Wiley. And what we see is she picks up 4 points in our survey right there. Her numbers go up. Does it turn the race upside down? In this polling, it doesn't suggest the contours of the race are turned upside down, as I think some in the media have suggested, but it's clearly having an impact. I think she did well last night in the debate, and it creates a greater sense of momentum. Jesse, I apologize. I wanted to get that in there because I know there were some questions.
No, I think thank you for addressing that. Yeah.
About that. In terms of if we want to jump to the restaurant data, I know Jim mentioned this, and it's such an important part of the environment and what I see the public wanting to do. We presented some statements to voters about the restaurant industry, and we wanted to understand how important it was and what impact they wanted to have on helping the restaurant industry to recover. What we found was, again, very, very encouraging and marries up with the optimism data. 90% agree that for New York City to recover, our restaurants and our nightlife need to recover, not just for the economic and the financial reasons, but frankly, they see it as being part of the social fabric of the city, part of our cultural life, and part of our DNA. Another very interesting statistic, more than 80%, 82% said that they themselves wanted to be a part of that recovery. They wanted to go out to restaurants. They wanted to go out to diners. They wanted to play a role of getting money into the hands of the restaurants, into the hands of the restaurant workers, knowing the volume and the depth of the devastation that had taken place during the COVID pandemic. So it's good to be optimistic. What I think we're seeing here is they are optimistic and they want to literally take money out of their own pockets and help the industry to recover. They believe by almost about 90% that we need a 5-borough restaurant and dining recovery. They want tourists to come back. Jim mentioned the occupancy numbers are not there yet. People want to have tourists coming back. They want to have them help revitalize the city's economy and the restaurants. And in terms of looking forward, there's enormous positive sentiment. 60% strongly agree that the outdoor dining that we have seen since COVID, they hope is here to stay. And that may be maybe not a change to the city landscape, but it certainly alters the characters and enhances neighborhoods as they see it, and they want that to continue. The last statistic I wanted to mention is around the issue of recreational cannabis. Having been legalized by the state relatively recently, we wanted to go out and understand what percentage of the public, at least the New York City voting public, was going to be likely to try cannabis. And what we found was that about a quarter said they would be likely to do that. I think that's probably a floor rather than a ceiling. I think we'll see that number go up. I know that there are enormous public policy implications from the tax base, from the economic development, and a lot of outstanding questions that I know Jim has perspectives about how this gets introduced. But that was another part of what we wanted to think about in terms of the future of New York and how the city is going to evolve, both in terms of the restaurant industries and new emerging industries like cannabis.
Thanks so much, Bradley. I want to touch on the open streets and restaurants. Obviously, the governor just announced that all COVID restrictions have been lifted, so that changes a lot of things, and that we're moving forward, right? We're seeing New York City recover, and so we wanted to ask folks in the audience how they feel about making open streets permanent in New York City. Are folks thinking that this will be good for the recovery, or might not have any sort of impact? But we'd love to get the audience's thoughts on this, and so I'll give a few seconds for folks to go ahead and enter their results, and we will also hear from Jim. Okay, let's see here.
That's a big number.
Overwhelmingly amount of the audience thinks that open streets is good for the city. So it's kind of on par with the results, right, Bradley, that you touched on before. Just 2 voters in the audience think it's not, and 9% are unsure yet. So I guess we will see moving forward how that looks, especially now with the COVID restrictions lifted. Jim, I wanted to pose a question to you. With the change in administration and the different priorities we're seeing post-pandemic, what type of business opportunities do you see trending?
Well, I think that a lot of this is going to depend on, going back to my earlier comments about whether or not the state administration, obviously that's the governor and the legislature, as well as the new city council and mayor, are willing to make some form of economic assistance, seed money, loans, et cetera, available for new business initiatives. My take from talking to our clients, and we represent a substantial cross section of businesses in lots of dimensions of the city, is that there's that entrepreneurial spirit that's really sort of closely associated with being a New Yorker. People come here to start businesses. They look for opportunities to diversify. They look for opportunities to transport those business ideas to other cities, other countries. So I think there's a lot of a pent up entrepreneurial drive that's been diminished because of the challenges of the epidemic, and that there's an opportunity, particularly if government uses, sort of a yardstick of sort of social indicators, if I can use that phrase. So I would think that we will see over the course of the next administration initiatives to provide, more and more housing for people who are currently, not housing, but job opportunities for people who are currently living in homeless shelters. A bunch of the large not-for-profits have already got model programs that are working along these lines. They just need more funding so they can expand them. There are a whole range of things that could happen using basically sort of social objectives for the city as a goal to help forward-thinking entrepreneurs to develop job opportunities, and to particularly in neighborhoods that have been badly hurt by the epidemic just because of the amount of unemployment.
Yeah. Bradley, please feel free to jump in, but I also wanted to remind folks to take advantage of the Q&A. If there are any questions that come up for Bradley or Jim, please use the Q&A box and we'll address them at the end of the discussion. I also want to touch on the cannabis topic, right? And want to ask folks in the audience, thank you. Now that cannabis has been legalized, do you plan on being a consumer? FYI, the polling is anonymous, so please feel free to answer freely there. But to Jim's point and Bradley's point, this is obviously an issue that has been a large part of the conversations up in Albany and will continue to be so, right? Now that it has been legalized. So let's see the results here. We have definitely no at 35%, which is a large number. But then we have definitely at 20%, okay, probably at 10%, possibly at 23%, not sure, 10%, and then I don't know at 3%. So we have some folks who are unsure, but then we also have a lot of folks who clearly are interested in. I think that goes to show how timely that is, right? So Jim, you have been following the cannabis landscape carefully. What are some of the things you will be paying particular attention to over the next 6 to 9 months?
Well, this market's going to be heavily regulated, and those of you out there who have reservations about it, I respect those reservations, and I know that this was a subject that was debated vigorously in Albany when the statute was adopted in both houses. I think we will see the new cannabis regulatory apparatus that's been established in the executive office of the governor create a regulatory paradigm that's very much like the state liquor license authority and an application process. There'll be a huge amount of community consultation. Community boards will play a major role in consenting to the location of cannabis emporiums, where theoretically you may be able to go and actually consume the products, points of sale, stores, et cetera, et cetera. So, let me just go out on a limb and say that the notion that somehow this is going to turn into the Wild West, I would respectfully submit to our viewers is not an accurate prediction. I think this is going to be a heavily regulated marketplace. I think you're going to see a lot of very, very careful, deliberate process going into designing this regulatory framework. And And I think that the bar is going to be, it's going to be a very high bar for applicants, guys. I don't, you know, the notion that that because you were successful and I remember I graduated from Colgate in 1972, but the notion that, you know, you can go anywhere on any college campus in New York City today, even before regulation, even before legalization, and find somebody who will sell you a couple of joints. That this is, you know, this is going to be happening on every street corner. I just don't think it's an accurate prediction. I think you're going to see a much more regulated and a much more disciplined regulatory environment.
Thank you, Jim. I also want to take the opportunity to highlight Capalino's own cannabis task force and hospitality task force. So the folks on the call who, you know, might have interest in learning a little bit more about that. We do have folks on our team who are on the ground and working in those areas, which is really exciting. And onto the last segment of today's webinar. You know, we talked about open streets, restaurants, the mayoral election, and the implications of that, recovery of New York City. So we're really at a historic time in the city's history, and we'll have an overwhelmingly new council, a new mayoral administration very soon. Jim, what are some of the things that you recommend that we all watch and monitor closely over the next few months?
Now, if I want to try to be focused in my comments. You're looking for observations about intergovernmental from
Both, I think, yeah, on that topic, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it goes back to the comment you made earlier on. That no city in America has ever asked, you know, 98.5% of its electorate to walk the plank, which is exactly what's going to happen on December 31st of this year. Other than eight council members, every sitting public office holder in city government is going to be retired from office. So, you know, this is a big new beginning, my friends, and I wouldn't underestimate that. Like all new beginnings, it's going to have its challenges, and I think a lot's going to depend on the posture that the new mayor takes. If you have a mayor who is inclined to reach out to borough presidents, respects their role vis-a-vis community boards, sees the city council as an important partner, particularly in the city's budget process, you know, on and on and on, then I think we could conceivably see a surprising amount of harmony, not necessarily in terms of everybody agreeing on specific issues, but at least a commitment to, you know, collaboration, information sharing, being respectful of prerogatives of different offices, etc. But I'm prepared for it to be a bumpy road, guys. I think it's, I mean, nobody can write a script and hand it out and ask everybody to follow the script. Public office holders just don't do that. And there will be bumps in the road, and there will be some challenges that we're going to have to work through as a city, and hopefully, temperamentally, we have a mayor that will be willing to work as a partner with other officials in government. And I would submit to Brad that one of the reasons why I think that Mr. Adams is doing as well as he's doing in the polls is I think people say to themselves, there's no time for on-the-job training here. There's just no time for it. You got to hit the ball running, the ground running. And here the guy's been the borough president of the largest borough in the city from a population standpoint, is multicultural and is multiracial and is multi-XYZ as you can possibly be. He's delivered pretty good results to the extent that a borough president has power or ability to deliver results. Let's put somebody in office who's got some miles on the odometer and some track record. Don't you think, Brad, that's been a significant factor in his success?
Jim, you're absolutely right. I think Yang's early success was him tapping into this sense of optimism and hopefulness. He was the happy candidate, and I think as people have thought more about what we need in government, the kind of leadership that we need, the kind of experience, you see him fading. And as exactly as you said, Adams has risen. I think the other thing that you've said, which was absolutely clear to me last night in terms of temperament and tone, we heard different visions last night in the debate about where the candidates wanted to take the city and how they would get there, but also temperamentally and with a different tone and a different approach, collaborative versus doing it all by themselves, very different ways mechanically that they would govern and oversee this vast and complicated city.
Understood.
And I'd like to, pose a question to Bradley as well. You know, we have a week until the primary. Is there anything you think or that you see happening in the next week or so that will affect what we're seeing on the ground with the mayoral candidates particularly?
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. That's a very good question. I see there are other questions along the lines of this about the polling. A poll is a snapshot in time, and I think what we have seen in this race is how dynamic that it has become. There are candidates that are going up and going down, going up and going down. I think one of the questions is whether Garcia has enough time to mount this kind of surge that may be underway. And I asked the same question about Maya Wiley about whether she has enough time to solidify the progressive rank behind her. There is another poll out by another organization today, a research organization, that shows that Maya Wiley ends up being the kingmaker because the progressives behind her ultimately jump to Garcia rather than going with Adams. So I think this is a very, very dynamic and fluid race. I think Wiley's coming on strong, Garcia's coming on strong. I didn't think Adams did so well last night. He's sort of ending this thing with a little bit of a whimper. And the question is how close it's going to get, but it's dynamic and it's going to, we still have a lifetime in politics, as Jim knows, between now and Tuesday. There's some interesting statistics I've seen out of the Board of Elections suggesting that a lot of people have asked for absentee votes, absentee ballots. Very few of them have been returned. There's a huge outstanding absentee vote that's typically committed at this time. I think that would have typically been a big advantage to Eric Adams. I think that has been swept away. Early voting, to Jim's point, we've spent a lot of money on early voting to make sure these polls are open. We've seen very, very minute participation there. So I think people are waiting for another shoe to drop. And this thing, which I think Jim and I think is probably not going to be decided till maybe the middle of July, there's going to be a lot of changes going on. And I don't suggest anybody stays up too late on election night, because we sure ain't going to have a result for a long, long time.
Yeah, and then we have some other folks. Thank you, Bradley. We have some other folks with questions kind of along the lines of what you just mentioned now, but someone had a specific question about Scott Stringer. And the question said, given the limited polling and uncertainties of ranked choice voting, might Scott Stringer have a chance to emerge as a surprise winner? Might voters be voting for him but not willing to acknowledge it in a poll?
That's a very, very thoughtful question. I don't think at this point that I see Stringer winning, but can he be, if not a kingmaker, something close to that? Everything that I'm seeing is that his voters are very committed to him, the ones that are voting for him today, and they are more inclined than anybody else to go all the way across, voting once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So I think Stringer's influence in terms of him winning this election is probably a pretty low probability. But where his progressive supporters go, I think they fuel Maya Wiley in ranked choice voting. And I think a good number of Maya Wiley supporters are going to be more comfortable with Garcia than they will be with Adams. So while I don't see Stringer sticking around in too many rounds of this, I think his votes are going to be very powerful. And to Jim's point, there are going to be some questions about whether the Stringer voters, more likely to be higher income white voters in Manhattan and Brooklyn, why do they have so much disproportionate political power because of this system of voting?
I would just throw out another, just real quickly, consideration, Brad and Jesse, and that is that with the number of contestants who are in the single digits, as Bradley knows in particular, it would not be unusual at this stage of the campaign for consideration being given by candidates to withdraw. And looking at the list, I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit and say that I think the only candidate who is might be likely to withdraw, and I don't have any I have no inside information, guys, so don't misinterpret my remarks, would be Mr. McGuire, on the theory that he would be withdrawing in favor of Eric Adams. So we'll see what happens. But that's the only dynamic that I see potentially in terms of the lineup changing would be the possibility of his withdrawal and throwing his support to Mr. Adams.
Anything can happen in 5 to 6 days, right? So we'll have to see. Someone else did ask a question about low turnout. So this question is, what candidate is favored by a low turnout, would be favored by a low turnout? Bradley, I'm not sure you want to touch on that.
Yeah, there's a good question. There are a couple of ways I can answer that. The first is that typically the lower the turnout that there is, the more white and upper income and better educated the electorate looks like. This is there are a huge number of not people of color across the city. When you look at the rolls of who is registered to vote and who votes, it skews much more white and higher income. The other thing to think about, we do have what I call ranked choice voting in action. There were some special elections that took place in the third week of March. There's a city council seat in Riverdale. There's a city council seat that Richie Torres gave up when he went to Congress. What happened there, and you're not coming out to a special election in the third week of March unless you are really very certain about who you're going to vote for and who all those candidates are. Those are not casual voters. These are the most sophisticated voters that we see in the city. What we saw in Riverdale was about 90% of voters were able to vote for 5 choices. When we look at Richie Torres's seat in the Bronx, something like 78% voted across the board for 5 candidates. So I think there's a 2-part answer, Jesse, to this question, which is a lower turnout probably helps Garcia, potentially helps Wiley, and comes at the expense of Eric Adams. And then there is the question of ranked choice voting. And again, I would say advantage to candidates like Stringer, advantage to candidates like Garcia with Stringer votes and Wiley votes. So I think low turnout is not only who shows up, but who actually goes through the full exercise of voting 5 choices, if that makes sense, Jesse.
Yeah, no, and we'll see exactly what that will look like, right, in a few weeks after the primaries, and who actually filled out 1 through 5, or who just filled out 1 or 2, right? So very interesting. Thank you.
Can I ask Brad a question?
Oh, of course, absolutely.
Okay, good. Brad, one of the things that's mystified me about this campaign, and I want to be respectful of all the candidates, but if there's one guy in this campaign who has a pedigree from a public service perspective, in terms of experience, is Sean Donovan. Why has he done so poorly?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, Jim, and I think we've struggled with that. And I know there's another question here about McGuire as well. He's rained a lot of money down on the city and hasn't gotten too far. Jim, I'm gonna answer this by speaking a little bit to your background. And I don't mean any disrespect to Sean Donovan. I don't know him, but he's a good public servant. I think, to your point, in moments of crisis, the voters look for who's got the right kind of leadership and who's got the right kind of, dare I say, gravitas. The city was in turmoil. Ed Koch, as you know better than anybody, was not a small personality. When the city seemed, at least to many voters, to be off the rails in the 80s, we went with Rudy Giuliani, a big personality. After 9/11, Bloomberg in his own way is a big personality. I think there's a sense that de Blasio has not filled that well, and I don't see that people looking at Sean Donovan and just feeling like he has the gravitas, the wherewithal to understand and be able to lead a complicated city that is a patchwork of complexity, disagreement. I don't want to overstate that, but I feel like he's not meeting that test. And if this were an election that were taking place 2 years ago, he might be doing better. He doesn't seem like the man for the moment. And I would argue that, frankly, works against Stringer as well. And I think we saw both of those on display last night at the debate.
Very insightful. Thank you.
Yes, agreed. And someone else had a question on turnout, which is what is required to pull the citywide onto a regular presidential election cycle as opposed to an off year, possibly a charter revision? Hopefully I got that question right. So I think the question is talking about how do we get more turnout folks in a non-presidential election cycle year.
That's a very good question. I think it's complicated. I think there tends to be more engagement and interest at the federal level, particularly when you have somebody like Trump that animates the city. Municipal elections, we just did this analysis for somebody else. There is typically a very significant drop off from presidential election years to gubernatorial years to municipal elections. And so the latest statistics that we're looking at, we've had these conversations with Jerry Skurnick at Prime New York, is somewhere around 7, 8, maybe 900,000, but low 900,000s at the most, versus the presidential election, which might have more than 1 million people turning out. And Jesse, I want to come back to what you said before and talk about a presidential election. We ran a presidential caucus in Iowa at the beginning of last year. The state Democratic Party used brand new software that had not been fully vetted, and we still don't necessarily know who won the Iowa caucus. I don't want to point fingers at anybody, but we are going to go through, we are a little bit of an experiment here about how well the Board of Elections software is going to be able to accurately and timely, and by timely, Jim, I mean by the middle of July, figure out who the heck won this race, let alone all of the races up and down the ballot across the city. Boy, that's a ball of wax, and I think we're building the airplane from what I hear while we fly it. And I don't, to Jim's point, not sure that's going to instill a great deal of confidence on the part of voters.
Yeah, hopefully we don't have to hand count the ballots, right? Because then we'll be seeing something like later than mid-July. Someone else in the chat asked, would candidacies like Stringer and McGuire had a better chance of running a primary against de Blasio 4 years ago?
That's really a Brad question.
Yeah, my sense was the city was was more content 4 years ago. It's really hard to beat incumbent office holders. I know there's been, to Jim's point, conversation around whether Schumer's going to have a primary next year or not from AOC or somebody else. It's hard to knock them off, and I don't think either of those candidates would have been able to take de Blasio out in a Democratic primary. It's a very difficult thing to do. And especially when times are good, it's hard to say we need to switch horses in the middle of the stream.
Thank you for that. And thank you for all the folks who engaged with the Q&A and the live polling. It really added to an insightful conversation. I also want to thank our panelists, Jim and Bradley, for such an incredible conversation. And I also want to remind people to stay tuned for upcoming announcements about our Capalino's Future of New York series. Please visit our website at Capalino.com to sign up for updates and learn how Capalino can help you achieve inclusive and sustainable business growth in New York. Thank you everyone for your time and for sharing so much important information. And yeah, have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jesse, for those good questions.